body has a mechanism that allows us to know when we're safe or not. When we're feeling unsafe, it'll go into fight, flight, and freeze.
How does one create emotional safety for someone else?
Emotional safety comes from inside us.
Insecurity a part of that?
As we were growing up, when we were showing our useless and idiot, and our parents chastised us. When somebody's parents do that, we lose that connectedness with the person who's frustrated or angry with us. Why is the person who's using the bullying or the criticism the reason? Because they feel unsafe. So we break down the cycle, controlling our environments in order to try and mitigate pain of disconnection. To do that, one of the strategies that's available is I'm going to be the best.
You use the term shadow work. Can you explain what that is?
When we show the ruthless parts of ourselves, our parents don't want us to behave like this because...
What if emotional safety was the missing piece in how we grow, heal, and relate to others? In this episode, I sit with Philip Behaviour, author, therapist, and creator of the Safe to Be framework, all about what it really takes to feel safe enough to change. From breaking family patterns to understanding the operating system that runs our emotions, Philip shares how awareness and curiosity can help us rewrite the code of who we've been and create space for who we're becoming. It's an honest conversation about self-understanding, emotional healing, and the courage to evolve. Philip, great to have you. How are you doing today?
I'm having a great day, Dwayne. Thanks.
That is amazing. So, Philip, we're going to be talking about emotional safety today. I think I want to start with that very obvious question. What is emotional safety?
There's a great way of defining it. And that's because our body has a mechanism that allows us to know when we're safe or not. So when we're feeling unsafe, it'll go into fight, flight, and freeze. And it doesn't matter what the trigger is that makes us feel unsafe. It could be someone ignoring us, and it could be someone trying to stab us. But immediately the body will begin raising the levels of norepinephrine, cortisol, and something else I'm not even remembering right now. It's measurable. We know when we're not feeling safe.
This is a term that's been used. I find it's been used a lot more often, especially over the last several years. You hear a lot of people talking about emotional safety. Sometimes you hear in meetings or business settings or discussions, this is a safe space. How does one create emotional safety, or is it possible for someone to create emotional safety for someone else? So thinking about me, Dwayne, can I create emotional safety for Philip?
It's one of the cool things where, on the one hand, emotional safety comes from inside us. There's a huge component of to what extent do I allow myself to be impacted by what other people are doing? And so I can shift the way that I'm interacting with what's going on in my environment. So if someone tells me that I'm an idiot and I haven't done work to own my own idiocy and stupidity, if I haven't done that shadow work, I'm going to be quite reactive because it's going to come across as something that feels threatening, because people in general don't want to associate with idiots to the same degree that they want to associate with people who are not. Or if someone thinks that I'm lazy or whatever it is that people draw away from, those are things that cause a lack of emotional safety. But while we have a lot of control over how we experience what's going on in our environment and what makes us feel unsafe and not unsafe, it's also something that happens collectively. Because in a workplace, I can be in a workplace where there's constant friction between people. So people are, and I'm looking just at the list next to me, people could be interrupting others when they're speaking or using sarcasm or condescension, sending passive-aggressive emails. That contributes to a psychologically unsafe environment, because when I am in the receiving end of any of that kind of behavior, it tells me that I'm not receiving respect, that my value is not something that other people are taking into consideration. And that doesn't feel safe for me. So by working together, an organization, a business can agree and put in practice education and other means to limit the amount of interrupting and the amount of sarcasm, the amount of passive aggression and aggression, etc. So we have both those levels, both the collective action and the individual response when these things are happening.
So if I heard you correctly, you talked a little bit about earlier, emotional safety partly starts from within. And you mentioned some things that people are calling out certain attributes or characteristics about you that maybe personally you haven't worked on or developed or improved on or maybe even recognized. Does that make it something along the lines of somebody's talking about your insecurities, and because of that, it's creating that emotional unsafe environment for people? Is insecurity a part of that?
I need to take you back to something that um, is a formative part of our understanding of what happens when a child is raised. And any child who's put in a situation where they're unable to restore connection with a parent who's ignoring them because they're dealing with other kids in the family, with their siblings, or they're having a shower, they're on the phone, they're doing something that ignores the child. Because in earliest childhood, we had no idea that our parent would ever reconnect with us when they were ignoring us. We have a baseline of trauma. So for all the traumas that anybody's ever experienced in their lives, there's another layer of trauma that sits underneath that. And that's the trauma that we experienced when we thought we were going to die because we couldn't get our parents to re-engage with us. And we had no idea because we lack a sense of time. In 5 minutes, we had no idea that such a concept exists. Like, it was meaningless to us. So if they disconnected from the perspective of a 1-year-old, they may never connect with us again. And that goes on through our lives, that awareness and that post-traumatic trauma from not being able to restore that connection. So all it takes as an adult is for someone to see parts of us that we associate with being rejected. So as we were growing up, there were things that our parents encouraged us to be: capable, brilliant, competent, agreeable. And we would feel the warmth. We would feel as if we're part of the family, as if they cared about us. But when we were showing our useless and idiot and incompetent and our vengeful sides, our parents chastised us in different ways. If it was something really extreme in my family, I would be hit. Like, I would be literally punished for showing parts of myself. So and when my parents did that, or somebody's parents do that, we can't feel as if we're we can't feel as if we connected. We lose that connectedness with the person who's frustrated or angry with us. And it takes us back to being that little child. So we revert back to being that little kid who can't restore connection. So we're very vulnerable to showing those parts of ourselves that we're discouraged. The label that we can give them, that part of ourselves, is shadow. So whenever an aspect of our shadow gets revealed or gets pointed at by someone's behavior, when they're trying to antagonize us, or they're doing something that brings up and exposes those parts that we're trying to not let people see because we remember the pain of not being connected, that feels very painful. And that's where psychological safety disappears, when people are exposing those parts of ourselves, and we've got nothing to do because we feel defenseless when that happens to us, and we feel as if we're going to be thrown out, like that no one will ever want to date us, that no one's going to want to hire us, that nobody is going to be interested in a person who has those characteristics. So it feels very threatening.
So with that tied to generational, it sounds like generational trauma incidences that have happened in your past life that can perpetuate and attribute to a lack of emotionally safe environment. Considering that, then, what is the responsibility of the people in the environment versus the individual, especially if the people in the environment aren't aware of that individual's past? How do you truly create emotional safety without having that knowledge or awareness?
I like that question. Um, so it doesn't matter who the person is. Um, when people in an environment get exposed to sarcasm, when they get exposed to blaming, or they're being bullied or criticized, it doesn't matter who they are. Some of the people will take those experiences to mean that they don't have respect, that they're not someone who's important to the functioning of that group of people. And by training everyone in an environment to be sensitive to that, to know that if you're going to blame someone, there's an X in percent chance that one of the people you're blaming is going to have an experience where that feels very threatening to them. And if we were able to put sensors to measure in real time that release of the norepinephrine and the cortisol and the adrenaline, what we'd be able to see is that ignoring physical boundaries is going to send those readings through the sky for certain people. What I try to train people in organizations to do is to become aware that we're doing this and to see the impact of our doing it on some of the people around us, knowing that if we can get to a situation where there's simply no bullying, where there's no criticism, harassment, sarcasm, etc., we're getting to a place that's inherently a lot safer than places where that happens a lot. And part of recognizing those dynamics is understanding that the things that I was describing to you actually belong, if I was to show you a table I created, fight, flight, and freeze are the stress responses we were talking before. Sarcasm's a fight response. When someone needs to be threatening me for me to use sarcasm, it's a way that I protect myself. So what I'm sharing with people is, like, by exposing that a person's attack on me is not just an attack on me, it's it's them defending themselves against a perceived threat that they're under. So they're only doing it because they're in distress. Now I'm looking at a picture of people doing things that make other people feel unsafe, but the reason they're doing it is because they feel unsafe. So what we get is the cycle. If we can wind it back to the beginning and say, okay, what's going on in our dynamic? Why is the person who's using the bullying or the criticism or the passive aggression, what's distressing them? Can I address that? And they're not going to do those things. And subsequently, people who are exposed to what they would have been doing are not going to be exposed to their behavior. So we break down the cycle.
So then, would it be okay then for somebody who is in an environment that isn't psychologically safe, and they see a leader or an individual that's creating that environment, is it okay for that person to say, well, this is more about their behavior is more about them. They have internal issues and I should just ignore it? How do you approach or come to terms with that sort of understanding now that I know that this situation being caused in terms of creating an unsafe environment could be because of deep rooted things that this individual that's in front of me is going through that they haven't dealt with? What's my responsibility there?
To the extent that you can impact their behavior in an organization where you can speak to what the other person's doing and it'll be received. So it's already somewhat psychologically safe because there's room to say something. That opportunity to compassionately say to the person, I'm not sure that what you're directing at me is about me. That's what we can do in a already partially safe environment. In a less safe environment, we take that information, and in the Tai Chi that I learned, we're basically doing fend off. What we're doing with the information that's coming towards us about there being something wrong with us, we just let it go by and know, exactly as you were saying, that the person who's doing that is in distress. And I can't make them feel a different way. what I can do is I can absorb or deflect their distress and try to get on with work. And if I was working in HR, for example, and I was aware that these kind of dynamics are happening, I'd be bringing in a person with the kind of skill set that I have to work on a systemic basis to train people to gradually build that psychological safety from the ground up or from whatever level it's at presently.
Philip, how has the climate impacted the work that you do in terms of where there are people who will respond to being told that they're creating an unsafe space or this person is offended? Nowadays, you'll have more people say, well, they're too sensitive. They're being sensitive or they're taking it out of context. How have you felt your work is navigating those sort of responses and environments in some places?
That's a form of gaslighting. It's a form of dismissing what a person's experiencing. And that's one of the reasons why I keep going back to the measurable impact that we actually do have stress hormones in our body responding when we're put in a situation that doesn't feel safe to us. So if those things are going on inside our body, it really does mean that the experience that we're having is authentic. And in environments where that is taking place, if there's an opportunity for healing that environment, so if there's someone in management or someone in HR or any subgroup within the organization who can raise the level of awareness about the legitimate harm that's being done to the people who are working there, that's the path to changing it. One thing that I haven't spoken about is from the perspective of someone who owns a company or who runs a company, whenever someone's going into a stress response of fight, flight, or freeze, there are some things that happen to the nervous system. I'm just looking for the slide I have of what this thing called amygdala hijack. So amygdala hijack is part of what goes on when I or anyone feels stress, and it's one part of the brain becomes dominant, and it's not the part of the brain that we need for getting on with our work. So the cerebral cortex or prefrontal cortex, where we have a lot of our memory and logic and reasoning and problem solving and listening and empathy, and these are all things that in most positions in an organization, that's what you're using in order to do your work. Well, these go offline the moment that someone stresses me and causes me to feel as if I'm not safe. So what's effectively happening in an unsafe environment is that you're allowing your employees, if you're the owner, to be in a suboptimal state where they don't have access to their memory, or maybe they've lost 70% of their access to their memory, where they can't use their logic, they can't reason, they can't problem solve, and they're not able to listen or to show empathy. And it's all artificial because nobody's taken responsibility for making it safe. Make it safe, and you regain 100% of your employees' energy and focus.
Something I've always said, Philip, and you may correct me, but I'm really interested to know. One of the things that I always say as a leader to people is I say, you can't make someone feel safe. You can only create an environment in which they can be safe. Is that true?
Yeah. You guys say more than
Okay.
that. Yes, 100% agree. Yeah, by cultivating an environment where the threats aren't present, you make it possible for a person to feel safe.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is good to know. Thank you. Because now anybody who's listening to me that has worked with me or alongside me knows that I've often said this, and this is something I firmly believe in. You know, I want to go back to something you talked about. You talked about I guess, unrecognized maybe trauma from a very young age, things that you've experienced as a child into your adulthood that are either unresolved or unrecognized, but there are threats in the world that if they kind of infringe on those things, that will create an unsafe environment for you. So I want to go back to the beginning. And what is, like, from your experience and the work that you do and kind of what has led you to be doing this work, what are those things in the beginning that create these sort of outcomes later on in life for people? Like, what are those experiences that happen? Because I can imagine as a child, you don't have much awareness or recognition or understanding or even ability to change the circumstances. So what are the things that we need to look out for?
One of the answers to that question is the ACTs, I believe the adverse childhood traumas. And these are a list of things that could happen to a person where they got hit, where they got shouted at, neglected, parents weren't available, parents were in jail, like any of those things. But for almost anyone living on this continent, we came from away. We came as refugees, we came as slaves, we came as something. And inherent in that is the displacement and the trauma associated with leaving a place that, when people move their entire lives from one place to another, they're generally doing it because it's painful to stay in the place where they were. Leaving, it is something that happens when it's voluntarily leaving because bad things are happening, because economically or socially or physically we're in danger. And within the process of moving over, there's also a lot of damaging things and harmful things that can happen to people, including assault and sexual assault and mental health issues and starvation and economic, like a wide gamut of things. So we know that in almost every family that has come across the ocean, there's going to be different things that impacted our ability to just relax and be calm. And the way that it impacted, it goes back to that still face child experiment that I was talking about, is that when a person is stressed, when they're in fight, flight, or freeze, and they're dealing with these kind of challenges, they're not able to connect properly with their children. So the children end up receiving messages about their environment that are stressful messages. So when a parent is depressed because of things that have happened to them or in their lives, or they're feeling anxiety because they're not sure how safe they are, they're not available to their child. Even if they're holding the child in that moment, emotionally they're unavailable. And as the child, as I was saying in the still face experiment, when the child can't get the parent's attention, they feel as if they're going to die. And so what we get is this perpetuation of trauma that propagates itself through history for generations and generations. And that's the baseline of all the stress that we have being a human being in the world. And an enormous amount of our energy goes to controlling our environments in order to try and mitigate further pain. And to do that, we'll try and we develop strategies. So one of the strategies that's available is, I'm going to be the best. Because if you're the best at something, you're attractive to people. And so they're going to want to be connected with you. So people will do it through sport, they'll do it through academia, they'll do it through dance and music and a million different sub-strategies to deal with that. And like I can go on, there's different strategies that we develop in order to try to mitigate that pain of disconnection.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, a lot of people's aspirations to be successful in something is related to overcoming some sort of generational trauma or impact that happened to you in the past?
Yeah, it's how we try to insulate ourselves from future pain. So one of the reasons we accumulate wealth is because that's a kind of security, but it's not just economic security. It's because we become much more attractive and desirable when we have wealth. It's yeah, you're gonna.
I was just going to ask, at what point does it sounds like ego?
It's a defensive so ego's interesting here because ego's super important because no one can take care of us apart from us. Like we're the primary taker carer of ourselves. So ego is very, very important. But what we're describing using a word that that often is accompanied with judgment. Behind that is the survival need. So if I don't have enough money, I'm going to be rejected, and so I have to have enough. But we get into all kinds of problems when there's no feedback loop that says, okay, we've hit the point where we don't need any more. It's very, very hard to do that because our brain is telling us you're never going to be safe. Even as we get closer to safety and closer and go past the point where we might be considered by other people to be safe, it's hard to turn off those automatic coping systems because that's all our nervous system knows.
So when you hear quotes or motivational phrases that talk about don't worry what other people think, focus on yourself, what do you think about that? Because it sounds like that would be very difficult for people since their motivation to be successful is, as you mentioned, to insulate themselves from things that have happened in the past. So is that phrase of not worrying about anybody else and just focusing on yourself, is that really a true phrase? Is that something people are able to actually do?
Well, that's what they are doing to a large extent. They're really taking care of themselves. They're getting as much education to take care of themselves. They're getting as much athletic accomplishment or as much wealth accomplishment. They're literally taking care of themselves. What gets lost in there is that at a certain point you don't need to be taking care of yourself as much. And what we lose in taking care of ourselves is taking care of our community and the people around us. So how do we drop out of the paradigm of I need to take care of me in order to take care of me to I need to take care of the people around me because we take care of one another. And that's how I get my needs met, my safety needs met.
So Philip, when we talked a couple of weeks ago, you talked about your own dysfunctional relationships that you had at a young age, and that has led you to doing a lot of the work that you're doing now. If you don't mind, take us back to those core memories, those things that you feel were really important in developing and constructing the path that you're on today.
Sure. I need to kind of figure out which is the best because there's so much beautiful pain in retrospect that it's hard to choose. Were there any things that stood out for you that you remember from that conversation?
I don't want to pick one for you.
Okay.
I just know that a lot of what you're doing now is significantly tied to a lot of that. So I just wanted you to kind of make that choice on what you felt was the most, I guess, impactful memory or experience that you want to bring forward.
Yeah. The biggest memory is not being able to connect. So somewhere in my family's history, there was enough trauma that it was very hard. My parents were so busy taking care of their own pain and their own still-faced child kind of experiences, seeking connectedness, that a lot of the time they weren't available for me. Now, to make things worse, the 4 months after I was born, my mom got pregnant again, which means that I have a 13-month younger brother. Brother is younger by 13 months. And what happened was, after receiving all that attention from my mom as being the eldest child, I had to wait in line for attention. And because he was the younger kid, he was a baby, I could wait. Except being that still-faced child, I couldn't wait because when I was being ignored, the information coming to my nervous system was that I'm going to die. That if I don't restore connection with my mother now, because I have needs of connective needs, like I feel abandoned, I feel neglected. If I don't do something about this, I'm going to die. Now, as an adult, it makes no sense. But as a 1-year-old, that was my universe. Like, it was, my mother was over there, I was over there, my brother was in the middle. If I couldn't get to my mother, my nervous system thought I was going to die. And so I developed a strategy of bullying my brother until he would cry. And at that point, my mother would get extremely upset with me because I'd hurt the baby or upset the baby, and she would hit me, which meant that I got connection. At the same time that I wasn't getting connection, because now we got this really contaminated, she can't connect because she's upset with me, but I'm getting some connection, and so it's just this corrupt, awful association of love and violence and disconnection. It really could screw up anyone to have that messed up push-pull love relationship. And it's taken a lifetime to unwind that and to take responsibility for my contribution to something that has been so painful and harmful for me. So at some point I had to step out of blaming my mother for hitting me and to realize that I was contributing to what was going on. And the fact that I was a child excuses it from what else could I do except advocate for my own survival in this dysfunctional way. But it also releases stress and pain out of it, because I realized that I was part of creating a dynamic, and realizing that she was doing the best that she could, literally, that her nervous system couldn't allow her, given all the things that she knew, to behave any differently from the way that she was. And what that earned me late in life, and she passed away within the last year, was being able to rebuild a relationship both with her and with my dad, because I was able to forgive myself and I was able to forgive them, and to own the dynamic of what was going on and see it within a continuity that went from generations back, when my parents were forced as refugees, their families, to leave Lithuania and Eastern Europe. And I see how that flows through me. And I'm just somewhere along the stream of history, breaking the cycle, though, so that my daughter, if she had been still living with me while I was doing the mass of my healing, would not need to propagate this onto her children to the same degree.
When did you recognize, at what age did you recognize your part in it and really able to unravel what happened in the past?
I wasn't able to do that until 2010, when I met a teacher in Miami by the name of Paul Farini, who was a very, very effective teacher, is a very, very effective teacher. And he was able to move me out, walk me past the blocks in my psyche that were inhibiting me from looking at how, I'm going to say, evil I'd been, how destructive I'd been. I needed someone to hold my hand so that I wouldn't destroy myself. Because if I didn't have accompaniment and I started to see what an awful person I'd been in order to survive, I might have rejected myself. I might have abandoned myself. And my psyche wouldn't have been able to hold enough self-acceptance and love for me to move through that without someone helping me. And that's part of the job that I've adopted now, is to work as kind of the Sherpa that helps people get through that portal that's so difficult to get through on our own, because our psyches designed to prevent us looking that closely at who we are.
How did that manifest? The destructive behaviors you mentioned when you're young, 1 year old, you probably didn't recognize what you were doing was, I think, probably just very reactive. As you got older and you had more awareness and consciousness in the decisions that you're making, how did your behaviors manifest at that point in those destructive kind of, methods that you're mentioning?
I'll walk you through some of my history there, because as a younger kid, the cognitive dissonance between the person I believed I was, because outwardly my mind was doing things that should communicate to people that I'm a really good person. I was incredibly helpful. I was incredibly outwardly loving. What I couldn't control was that I was a bully to other people, that I got expelled from preschool for being violent. This is before the age of 5. I'd already been expelled from an environment that couldn't hold my behavior because it was so antisocial. So throughout high school and elementary school, my psyche, to preserve itself, needed to say that I wasn't the problem. So everybody around me was the problem. And one of the dominant approach that I took is, I need to create utopia. Everybody else is wrong, so we fix them by creating an environment where everybody else changes. And so rather than being able to see that it was me, that if I could change me, everybody else could just go on being themselves, but I was actually causing my problems. And part of that became really clear when I immigrated from South Africa, where I'd grown up, and thought that by leaving the country, I could leave all of these challenges behind. And I went to live in Israel. I was there for 14 years. And all of Philip came along with me. So I just people who'd never seen me, met me before, would be reacting to me and responding to me in the same way that the people had known me my whole life. And there was no continuity. The only continuity was me. I immigrated after 14 years to Canada and still hadn't fixed this and sorted it out. And so I reproduced it a third time. And it was becoming abundantly clear at a certain point that there were some very serious problems that I needed to deal with. The place where the most pain would show up for me would be in finding romantic relationships. And I was married at one point. Everything fell apart after 2 or 3 years because the parts of myself that I wanted to contain, those shadow parts that were so destructive, would eventually, combined with the other person's shadow parts, would become so corrosive that we couldn't hold the relationships together. And before I went to the retreat with Paul Ferrini, I reached a stage in my life where I couldn't take another cycle of forming relationship and seeing it fragment. And I was very, very motivated at that point to fix this for once and for all. And he was the man who could help me do that.
Why?
Because he'd done the work himself, because he'd done shadow integration, because he was able to hold me tightly enough and shake me hard enough. Like, it wasn't a great experience with him. It was emotionally violent in a very helpful way. Like, I was given an ultimatum that, because one of the big challenges that I had was with suppressed rage and not being able to own the raging part of myself. The ultimatum I got from Paul when he pulled me aside one day at the retreat was, Philip, you do Tai Chi, you do all these things to try to communicate to the world what a gentle and loving person you are. But the moment you walk into a room, you're seething with rage. You try to cover it up, but anybody who's attuned will see the rage. They get it, and they don't want to be connected to you. There's a raging little boy inside you, in a child, raging in a child. Unless you can integrate that rage and deal with what's causing it, your life's just going to continue the way that it does. And that was kind of the hand holding, the pulling through the portal, the beginning of a process of looking at myself in a way that I felt supported and could really get past the pieces that needed to be transcended.
What would bring other people who are in your situation, what would bring other people to that epiphany, especially if they don't have a Paul or somebody else that has done the work? What would bring the average person to that realization that you came to?
We really need someone to pull us through that portal. So what I've tried to do in my work, because there are not a lot of people like Paul and now like me and the people I'm gathering around me, is to try to prime people so that they can get through as much of the process as possible. One of the things that holds a lot of hope for me is being able to do the training for psychological safety on a broad enough level that synergistically people are starting to become aware in an organization that all the people around them have these same kind of challenges. And so that they can bootstrap simultaneously and together and help one another get through these processes where they may need someone, well, eventually they're likely to need someone with my skills or with Paul's skills or Gabor Mate's skills. Are you familiar with Gabor Mate?
No.
Okay, for anybody who's watching this, please Gabor and then Mate, Mate, with a little thing above the E, is one of the most incredible men out of Vancouver who has been working as a medical doctor in the downtown east side, which was the area where most of the drug addicts and homeless people in Vancouver were living. And he started looking at the people he was working with as a medical doctor and realizing that almost every single person who was using drugs and alcohol had trauma history. And so he shifted from a medical perspective to looking at the trauma and set up training and all kinds of processes to move people through their trauma so that they could reach a place of healing. So he's one of the other people who, if anybody's looking for great wisdom and for people who are doing this work, they should seek him out.
Thanks for that. That's a really good referral. You use the term shadow work, your shadow self. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah. So the shadow is when we're, I'll start again. If anybody has raised a child or observed other people raising children, when they're very young, the number of things that we say to them around what to do and how to be is just incredible. Like it's a flow that's nonstop. And in my mind, I've got a child in the dining room or the dining space, and they're being told, don't throw your spaghetti, eat with your mouth closed, don't talk while you're eating. Look at, like, there's a million instructions that we're receiving about how to be acceptable within society. And on the other side is the don't do this, don't do that, don't be that. Like, so we get this polarized list of all the things, how to be and how not to be. When we're doing the things that our parents or our caregivers are encouraging us to do and how to be, they're much closer to us. We get the experience of feeling much more loved and accepted. Whereas, as I was sharing before, when we show the ruthless parts of ourselves, cruel, inconsiderate, violent, vengeful, destructive, anxious, our parents withdraw. They don't want us to behave like this. because they're afraid that we'll be rejected by society. So the message that we get is that it's okay to be one way and it's not okay to be another. And because the cost energetically, because there's pain associated with showing those, I call them the blue parts of ourselves, our ruthlessness and cruelty, our shadow parts of ourselves, because it's the pain of that still-faced child when people disconnect. And we automatically go back to, well, I'm never going to get reconnected. I have a visceral response of pain, emotional pain, when people respond like that to those parts of myself. So they get very deeply buried. And it takes a process of safety creation for ourselves to start to reclaim ownership. Those parts of ourselves never went away. But I need to be able to reclaim them. Because think about it, if my daughter is 28 now, was being accosted by someone, and I was afraid that she was going to get raped, for example, I would act ruthlessly. I wouldn't be concerned about being cruel toward the person who's the aggressor, who's going to harm her. I'm not concerned about being a bully or violent or vengeful or destructive. I need those parts of me to protect my daughter. So even though under normal circumstances, those are not the things that I'm going to show on a first date. It's not the things that I'm going to show when I'm in a job interview. I need to know that those pieces are available. And if I'm doing the same thing to those parts of myself that everybody else is, I'm rejecting them and burying them. And whenever they get exposed, I actually begin to reject myself. So there's a reclaim, and that's the process I did a lot with Paul, like with my rage, is how do I own my rage? And one of the first questions we asked is, how's my rage protecting me? How is my violence protecting me, my anxiety, my craziness or disobedience? How do each of these things that I'm not comfortable with and I'm afraid that people will see, what gift do they give, and when have I used them? Because I've used every one of those things at some point in my life, and it probably saved my life. And what I've done since doing the work with Paul is to shrink the process so that instead of taking as many years as it took for me, we can do this process in a matter of months or less than a year or two, which in emotional healing terms is just astronomically fast. By using the tools and the techniques that I've absorbed and been taught and have developed myself.
So giving you a quick, maybe understanding of myself, because I feel like this is a really good time to maybe open up a little bit about where I see my shadow, and I could be wrong. Right now, as it stands, I'm very much an introverted person, and I'm a person who finds it difficult to talk and express feelings, especially deep emotional feelings. And I believe a large part of it was growing up. I grew up in a household that really didn't express feelings. Feelings weren't things that you talked about often. I knew I had a lot of love, especially from my mother, because she did all the work to take care of me and to look after me. But there was no words of expression that came along a lot that were reassuring and loving in the way that perhaps most kids and parents are doing nowadays, or being told to do nowadays. And having a stepfather growing up, who when I was 5 years old came into my mother's life, I never got along with, and for some reason he didn't really like me. And because of that, I stayed away from that part of the family a lot. Like I would be in my room a lot when I was at home because I didn't want to be around him in the general area of the home. And I feel that kind of led to me being an introvert to who I am today, being an introvert and being somebody who isn't really expressive when it comes to my deep emotional feelings. And I don't know whether it's a lack of trust or maybe a lack of ability or comfort. I'm not sure what that is. But yeah, what are your thoughts there?
So I can completely identify with what you're describing. And I want to speak about your experience, but it may be helpful by describing how I saw my experience of that. And part of what people may be picking up if they're watching this or listening to me is a fairly flat affect, that I'm not terribly expressive, and that on the vocal range, I'm quite monotone. And my explanation, a retroactive explanation, and because I don't know the real reason, but I surmise that when I was expressing myself as a child, rather than embracing my self-expression, I was ridiculed for having any expression whatsoever, and that having expression in my family was opening yourself up in a vulnerable way that could then be exploited, and I could be hurt for having for being expressive. And so the lesson that I took away from that is it's not safe to express. Tamp it down, because the moment you express yourself, you're just going to get hurt. Does that correspond at all to what your experience?
Yeah, it does. It's very interesting that you say that, because when I think about my mother in particular, we probably share more expressive emotions now than we did when I was younger. So I feel like I feel like I have those experiences tethered to who I am and how I am today. I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, me being an introvert, me not having the ability to be very expressive about my emotions. Is that my shadow?
The shadow part is, is being overly emotive. So, so that part is a part that you're afraid of. That's a part that you don't want people to see. More, as you're talking, my brain's going to this place of all that needs to happen for us to be different is for it to be safe for us to be different. So by creating an environment that embraces different parts of ourselves, these unexpressed pieces that weren't available, we can make it safe to be differently. There's a methodology that's been incredibly helpful for me, and I've used it with all of my clients if they go far enough into doing this kind of work. And it's inner child work, where I'm able to ask them, have you ever looked after another person, a child, or have you looked after a pet? Because if you have, and you were able to take care of that other being, we already know that you have the capacity to do so. And when you're doing that, you're probably doing it in a way that feels very confident and reassuring. So, for example, if my daughter was in distress when she was a child, I had no problem telling her that everything's going to be okay, that I'm here to take care of her, that walking her through that in a reassuring way. Well, what if I was to go into a meditative state in a safe, imagined environment and start reparenting myself using exactly the same strategy? And where I was once dependent on my parents to parent me and to encourage me to share these vulnerable parts of myself, I'm no longer dependent on them. Now I can do it for myself, and I can go into visualization, and I can hold that little 3-year-old Philip and parent him in a way that I would my daughter. And I can say to Philip as he's visualizing himself being in a stressful situation at elementary school or at any time in his life. And I can reassure him knowing that I've done that before. And it doesn't work with one repetition because what it requires is neuroplasticity to constantly repeat experiences. Neuroplasticity is something incredible because what it's about is different synaptic connections that make our thoughts travel through our brains happen because there's wiring going on in our brains, but it's not static. We can change it at any time in our life simply by experiencing things and making different connections and associations. And when we do something differently, when we give our bodies a different response and we do it repeatedly, then actually unwires the old wiring and replaces it with new wiring. And like one of the most profound places where this happened to me was being hit by my mom, what to me felt like every single day. So my association with my mom was someone who would punish me and hurt me every single day. And I explained earlier why I was able to walk away from that understanding later on in life. But I was haunted through almost all of my life by the association of being hit by my mom and the pain. And it was visceral. Like if I tried to remember it, I could go back to being that 1 or 2 or 3-year-old kid and be back there being spanked. Through the inner child work that I've just described, I was able to erase the memory synapses that remembered viscerally what it was like to be there. And now I probably, if I really concentrated, could put myself back into that situation and remember it viscerally. But I have to make a real effort to do that. It's not part of my association with either myself or my mother. And so, in effect, I've installed a new operating system. I'm not operating on Philip 1966, the system that I was born with. I'm now operating with Philip 2010, 2011, 2025. There's a whole new me that never existed before that's separate from that traumatized child.
So, Philip, what is the work that you do right now, and how much of your past influenced you to do this work?
Yeah. Well, because of the pain that I was experiencing, I've spent my entire life wondering how to make pain, how to take away my pain, and how to try to set up systems so nobody else has to feel pain. And I have an inclination towards, I'm an engineer by trade, an engineering technologist, and my brain works in a way that operates on systems and tries to fix them. And I've applied this approach from engineering, and software was another area, to the psyche. And my goal, and in some ways I've been liberated because I didn't study the dogma of psychology that a person learns when they go to college to study. I could come from a direction where no one was telling me, you're not allowed to think that. You're not allowed to put those two pieces together. It's like, screw it. Like, I'm going to do it my way. And what it's enabled me to do is to reverse engineer the psyche, to reverse engineer trauma, and to be able to find the places where this thing connects to that, and where anxiety is connected to fight, flight, freeze, and to disconnection, etc. Like, I have a map in my head, and I have a map written down as well, that I can walk through, that shows me where trauma is happening and where the opportunities are for changing things. And so for over 10 years, I've been working with counseling clients and helping them through these processes to do the kind of healing that I've done for myself. And several years ago, I went after exposure to someone who was doing mediation, and realized like they were really just doing the same thing that I was doing, but they were doing it in a different environment. And what a great opportunity for me. So I became a mediator, and I've taken the mediation. I had to heal the familial stuff where there was an us and the them was people of wealth and people who belonged to the mainstream, and us were the rebels in my family and the people who couldn't think and behave in the same way. I can now walk into a corporate environment because I've healed that piece that needed to allow me to feel comfortable in there. And I've now brought my work into organizations and into corporations to be able to share this at a much broader level. And one of the gifts that I have is that has led me to develop a training program that can be delivered to 10,000 people at the same time through an online app that walks people through the kind of things that we've been talking about over 16 weeks in weekly micro lessons. So by going into an organization and training a few people in leadership to hold the space and to go deep into, like, to learn what we've been talking about at depth, so that they can support the thousands of people who work for them, and then delivering to all of those people 16 weeks of micro lessons with all the support that goes along with that. I believe that we're at a point where we can radically change the way that business gets done and the way that people feel in their workplaces, because once people understand where pain is happening and where it's unsafe to be in an organization, and enough people in that organization grasp this, I don't believe that it's going to take very long to eliminate those stress sources and to create environments that are much more psychologically safe. So my vision is to bring this into as many organizations as possible on as fast a timeline as possible.
That's a great vision. And thanks for sharing that. I know one of the frameworks you use is safe to be. Can you explain what that is?
That's exactly what I've been describing. That's the 16 weeks of 15, 20-minute micro lessons delivered to everyone and the training for internal leaders. For people who are in management, what I was finding, because I participate in the HR community over here, is that there's a lot of stress and tension. There's a lot of conflict that nobody's dealing with, in part because it's so expensive because everything gets delayed until there's a breakdown, until the shit hits the fan. I don't think that that's the ideal situation. So I've created an online community, and I'm asking people to consider joining it. And that's an environment where conversations like the one that we're having, to go into where the conflict is taking place, to find opportunities for shifting dynamics. Safe to Talk is an environment where there's training available, where there's regular events, where there's circles of conversation, and it provides a venue for people to talk about what's going on and to find solutions before there's an eruption.
So I was going to ask that, in terms of finding a solution, what would be the first step for leaders or even individuals that are in relationships or teams in terms of creating an environment that is safe? What would be some first steps that they would take?
If they can bring in the Safe to Be training, fabulous. If they can join Safe to Talk and participate in those conversations, fantastic. If they want to step into it much more slowly than that, what they can do is they can go to my, they can contact me, because I don't know where it shows up on my website, and they can request. Well, you know what? I shared it with you. You have the presentation that I did that contains so many of the slides that back up what I'm talking about. And one of the things that's in there is a slide that shows fight, flight, and freeze. And I remember at the beginning I was talking about sarcasm is being a fight response, blaming is a fight response. What we didn't talk about was the flight responses. So avoiding people, lying to people, ghosting, all of these are flight. They're responses that a person in distress will bring out within their environment. Freeze can be ignoring someone. Like I've done mediations where people are so frustrated because the person, one of the people they're working with, ignores them. And rather than attributing it to the fact that that person's in distress and ignoring as a way to protect themselves, they're offended by being ignored. What's wrong with me is the question they ask, rather than what's ailing the person who's ignoring me. So I would be bringing these graphics into the workplace and finding ways to share with the people working there the kind of things that I'm talking with you about right now.
I'm curious. We've used the different terms, psychological safety and emotional safety. Are they interchangeable, or is there a significant difference between those two?
You left out one, and relational safety. So I'm now using all three of them. And if you want to be nitpicky, yeah, you can find the distinctions between them. So one of them puts the emphasis on the emotions that a person is feeling. Another puts the emphasis on the psychology of what these dynamics are. And the third takes a look at the relational impact of them. But essentially, underneath all of those titles, whichever access point you want to use, you're going to excavate exactly the same content.
That's interesting. I never thought about the relational safety. I think you think about relationship. You think about relationship being the end result of whatever psychological or emotional safety or lack thereof. It manifests into the relationship, right? If I don't feel physically, psychologically, or emotionally safe with you, Philip, then our relationship will kind of show that, that lack of trust that I may have, or lack of safety. So seeing that relational, I guess, safety is an outcome of the psychological and the emotional safety. It's those things, that happen underneath. What would you give leaders or any individual in terms of a practical step that they could go apply right now to start building stronger emotional and psychological and ultimately relational safety environments?
Apart from referencing the graphics that you'll share with people who are interested, I would say that it's worth building an awareness that there's only two states. There's the state of connectedness, where people are engaging in a way that brings them closer together. Contrasting that with separative things. So anything that separates. So when I'm sarcastic, or I blame someone, or I ghost them, what we're doing is we're separating. So building that mindset of being able to look at everything that we're looking at right today, but putting it through a filter that says, am I observing something that's connective or separative? And if it's separative, is there anything that I can do to make it safe for people so that they're not doing things that are separative? Because separative is almost always the first sign that things are psychologically unsafe. And so there's something that if we look deeply enough, we'll see that we've created an environment where people aren't feeling as safe as we want to. So there's something we can shift. What is it?
How much? It sounds like there would need to be a certain level of self-awareness to understand if you're creating an environment that's either separative or connective in most people's situations or some people's situations. How would one recognize that, though? Because sometimes we're not aware that we're creating an environment that is disconnecting our relationships with people. So somebody who may not have that high level of self-awareness, or maybe they're under certain competing interests and pressures and whatnot, how would one step out or step up to really, take stock and recognize that?
We're conditioned to override information that we're getting that someone else is uncomfortable. We'll excuse it. We'll explain it away. We'll do whatever we can to make ourselves into someone who's acceptance worthy rather than someone who's problematic, who's causing ripples and issues. So encouraging people, creating enough safety to be able to notice when and to hold on to that information that I said something and it didn't get received in the way that I wanted. And rather than burying that information, holding open the crack for just a moment and starting to accumulate that awareness that I don't just have a benign and desirable impact on my environment, I'm also a source of stress and tension some of the time.
Interesting. So this is the part of our conversation where I turn it to the guests to read their letter to their former self, all the things that you know now that you would like to tell yourself in the past. So I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. So I ran into a problem the moment that I started thinking, and I really thought about this extensively. So I'm writing a letter to my younger self, but my brain is remembering chaos theory. And in chaos theory, there's the story of a butterfly that flaps its wings. And because it flapped its wings, on the other side of the planet, like the flapping of the wings propagated so many different changes that wouldn't have happened if it hadn't flapped its wings, that it contributed to a tornado on the other side of the planet. And there's a whole bunch of movies about what happens if you go back in history and you introduce something that changes history for the rest of time. So I didn't want to do that to myself because why ruin the history? I love the outcome where I've arrived at today. But what I can do is, instead of speaking to my younger self, I can speak to, and I wrote it as follows, to all the youth who, like me, felt alienated, alone, powerless, misunderstood, and isolated. I want to say to these people, hi, it's like talking to myself, my life continues to get better and richer with every passing year, because I discovered and then I refined an incredibly effective way to heal my pain and trauma and to empower myself. I'm in the 4th year of a relationship with a woman of my dreams, and my daughter is someone that I love and admire. My work's satisfying and important and stimulating, and the person that I love most in the world is myself, which means that I never again have to fear the pain of being unloved. So I would convey to all of the people I've mentioned that you too can enjoy a life like the one that I'm living. And I've made it easier. Dwayne's making it easier by doing the work that I'm doing, that he's doing, and by providing you with insights and tools and wisdom so that you can access it at the age that you are, instead of having to wait until you reach a more an older age and accessing it. So you're in a situation that we could only have dreamed of. And that's one of the miracles of being alive in 2025. Like, even though the world is in such chaos, we also have so much access to wisdom and to tools. And it's all you need is a screen and an internet connection. And suddenly you have access to things that people would have to go and spend time in a monastery for 15 years to be able to learn these things. or they were just inaccessible before.
Thank you, Philip, for sharing that. Is there anything in our discussion today that we didn't touch on that you want to talk about?
Just encouragement, an invitation to people to check out my Advantages Mediation website, and to really consider the Safe to Talk community, because especially if you're in management or HR, or you're in any kind of leadership, that's where you're going to find some of the answers that are difficult to even ask in other places. I will leave it at that.
Well, we will definitely leave it at that, Philip. This was a wonderful conversation. Thank you for being my guest today.
And thank you for hosting in the way that you have, and for putting out the invitation, Dwayne. Super appreciative.